Today, I'm really excited to welcome Thomas Bouldin, a true leader in software engineering. Thomas has worked at some of the biggest companies in tech. He's currently a staff tech lead at Google, leading projects like Firebase app hosting, the original Firebase hosting, GenKit, and Cloud Functions. Before that, he was at Facebook, where he helped scale Parse to over 1 billion users. And even earlier, he was shaping Microsoft's application model. Thomas was also recently married and is an IDC staff instructor. Thomas, it's awesome to have you here today.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Awesome. Thomas, you have built some really cool systems that have handled billions of connections. And so I'm curious, what's been harder? What's been more challenging? Scaling this significant cloud infrastructure to handle all these petabytes of data, or teaching someone to dive in open water at night?
So honestly, teaching scuba is closer to my now former management responsibilities than my technical ones. And night diving isn't that challenging. It's part of the advanced course, so people have already been familiarized with their gear and have some confidence before they agree to the night dive. So after that, it's really just about like good vibes. Share with them that I love it, and then they get excited and they do it too. But there are some parallels. So, like this, the PADI Scuba curriculum builds on previous knowledge to teach people the next skills. And similarly, big data starts with small data. You learn lessons, you re-architect where necessary to unlock the next 10 to 20x scale. Um, at Google, many of these lessons are codified in the tooling and systems we use, but at Parse, we definitely learned the hard way and had to scale ourselves.
So you started your career at Microsoft and you've contributed to lots of different aspects of innovation at Google and then also with Parse and Facebook. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the experiences that shaped your approach to engineering?
Yeah, a really early moment for me was when I worked in Windows on a feature that was going to be built that was requested by a large volume customer. I was fresh out of college and treated software like an art. I was almost socialist in that regard. Like, shouldn't software be designed for all customers? Is it unethical to give a particular customer say in our roadmap? And over time, I just accepted that software engineering is engineering. You solve problems, you solve business problems. Um, and so I became much more comfortable with that. And in fact, I'm dealing with it more and more every day with Firebase app hosting, where my internal mantra is Firebase easy, enterprise ready. So one of my current projects is actually making it easier to extend your website with more of Google Cloud, specifically because it's blocking a Fortune 100 customer. A more recent lesson that we shared was the value of documentation and ease of use. If your future feature isn't learnable, it just doesn't exist. James taught us that at Parse with his Hacker News article on good documentation that even made it into the quarterly newsletter. And it led me to a philosophy I call demo-driven development. You need to design your product to minimize the time from reading docs to just saying wow. And it's these kinds of products that are really easy to pitch and learn, and they're much more likely to get adopted.
Yeah, I love this idea that if a feature isn't learnable, it doesn't exist because there are so many of these incredible features, products that like they are hidden. And if you don't know they exist, all this work that went into them doesn't really help the user get better, be more effective. And so I think I love this statement. Let's talk a little bit about your time at Google. You helped redesign something called the image search indexing pipeline. It sounds pretty complex, and I would love to know what were some of the biggest challenges in tackling such a core big system that was presumably at huge scale?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, fundamentally, the first challenge is just understanding and wrapping your head around how big that scale is. Like at the time, 100 megabits per second was the fastest internet we had. And during college visits, I used to quiz people, how long would it take to download 1 petabyte of data to process it? And the answer is about 2.8 years. So when you realize how big that problem is, you realize how bad congestion in that pipeline can be. So one of the biggest problems we faced is what we call the fan-in problem. This is when you have many writes that are going to go to the same part of the database and overload it. So in image search, you have many websites linked to the same image URL. You have many image URLs linked to the same bytes, and the same bytes turn out to be re-encodings of the same image, and all of those could hotspot the database. So we had some innovations where we could drop from synchronous to asynchronous processing when we detected contention, but frankly, just that's not enough. Like imagine that one pixel tracking pixel for marketing. It's everywhere. You cannot handle that load. And so in these particular edge cases, we learned to just drop it and not worry about it.
You were part of a small team at Parse, which was a Y Combinator startup in the Bay Area as employee number 7, which seems kind of crazy, getting in there so early, especially leaving Google and having been part of such a great business. You helped scale it before it was later acquired by Facebook. What was it like to be at the heart of that team in the early days? And then what was it like transitioning to Facebook?
The vibe was just so great. It was so many smart people, and we just got stuff done. Coming from big companies, I really loved the lack of bureaucracy and how well we could just iterate and launch product rapidly. And it really was just a product of passion. It really drove the product forward. I remember I was so addicted, I spent my weekdays focusing on my assignments and then some weekends focusing on the stuff that I thought would be a good idea, but wasn't on a roadmap. And I had a bit of a hybrid role. So I started with things like the file API, and then I moved into parse push. I was the lead there, which technically meant I was the only person on it. And then we grew a little bit more. But I touched everything. I meddled with our API servers, the data layer, the compute product. I was kind of a DevOps engineer for a while. I couldn't stay in one place. One of the things that I think is really interesting is that our push network for Android actually predates Firebase Cloud Messaging, or back then called Google Cloud Messaging. And we learned a lot of lessons the hard way. Like telcos do some weird stuff with just like breaking connections and not even telling you they've broken the connection because they don't want you to reconnect. And so like we had to learn to detect and fix that type of problem. It turns out that some device drivers not only throw errors, but they're errors that aren't documented and aren't declared in the function, so you can't handle them directly. And so we had to find ways to fix that. And eventually we got over all that type of stuff. Um, and there was a lot of optimizations we had to make as we grew, especially when the transition happened to Facebook. When we transitioned to Facebook, that that growth curve was steep. We spent all of our time fighting fires, and we had to work overtime just to make the infrastructure scale so that we weren't spending all of our time fighting fires. Part of that included rewriting our system from Ruby to Go. We had some advanced software in Ruby like Rescue that I had to reverse engineer and re-implement in Go. But that gave me the opportunity to add a couple of cool new features. The ability to kind of say the heavy work is done, go ahead and give me another task, but don't shut down the service yet because I still have some light work to do. Um, there was also some challenges because we were built on Mongo and it wasn't as mature back then as it is today. We were told at the time that we were the world's largest installation. And so we ran into all the edge cases. Especially, I remember geoqueries were just problematic. And so we had to really work. That was where like my DevOps side came into play, is that I had to work with our operations engineers to find contingency plans so we could do these massive, billion device pushes without affecting our API servers, our bread and butter products.
I remember a few times specifically where there would be some Mongo related problem, and I would get an email from one of our customers like, WTF, what's going on over there, guys? And I would basically drag our CTO, Kevin, onto the call to have him explain. And it was sometimes really painful. But, that's sort of part of the exciting aspect of things, is pushing things to scale, trying to figure it out as you go. Um, so with all these different platforms you've worked on, I'm sure there's been a lot of pressure, and, whether it impacted your sleep or, it made things hard and challenging. Can you think of times where like the plan, it wasn't going the way that you wanted to, and how did you handle those kinds of situations?
One of the first things that comes to mind is the Cloud Functions for Firebase V2 launch. We really had a timeline. We wanted to launch at Google I/O with the vanilla cloud counterpart, but we actually have more use cases that we stitched together than just the cloud counterpart, and they weren't really on people's roadmap and supported. I literally had a doc called Crash Landing to try to make sure that the launch went as well as possible, given that things were kind of being tied up. Um, we outlined all the gaps, we had mitigation plans. Sometimes we were able to get a partner to prioritize what we wanted. Other times we got partners to say, go ahead and edit our code base for us. And so we did manage to launch with a compelling product. It wasn't until later when we got some of the things like the cloud functions.net URLs, which are like an implementation detail core to our like really easy to use API product. But we held back for GA for that. And it really kind of, customers understood that like the beta product, it's cool, you can use it, but it may be feature incomplete. GA product, here we go. And you can really see that in our adoption curve.
So with Firebase, you've built some really cool products and features. Some of them are extremely widely used across things like Firebase hosting and cloud functions. What's it been, what's your process for building some of these super scalable, high impactful products?
So when I worked on Cloud Functions for Firebase, or I currently work in Cloud Functions for Firebase, which was originally a much tighter collaboration between Cloud and Firebase. Like I actually edited their code, I did an on-call rotation or two, and in fact, Firebase invented the event pipeline that is now known as EventArc. But Cloud took over EventArc, and we've really kind of separated responsibilities. So right now we just do tooling and SDKs. So it's more of a people scaling problem because I managed a portfolio of multiple products, and anytime you put someone on Cloud Functions, you're taking them away from other efforts. With hosting, when I took over the team, it was running pretty smoothly. Increased scale was mostly a matter of allocating resources. I will say that there is one component that's starting to explode, but I can't go into detail on what it is, and we're re-architecting it and stuff. Um, but Firebase app hosting was really like, it's a brand new product. We had to be careful not to make brand new mistakes. And luckily, Google really does have institutional knowledge and tooling to make scaling easier. There's actually a joke internally that Google makes the immensely hard moderately complex at the cost of making the immensely simple moderately complex. So we saved
Nice.
a lot of trouble by building like on top of these building blocks. Our internal code that runs inside what we call Borg is built on SRE design platforms that really solve scaling problems for you. And also one of our selling points is that we're built on Google Cloud. So many of the resources are actually in the customer's project. We manage resource for you. And by leaning on those other products, we're leaning on teams who have already had their fire drills. They've already managed their scaling problems. So we really didn't have those types of fires this time around.
Can you tell us a little bit more about one of the products from Firebase called extensions? From what I understand, it's a really popular aspect of your product. And I'd
Mhm.
love to hear more about like some of the craziest or creative usage of Firebase extensions. Just thinking about parse, I remember the one that really stood out. It wasn't a crazy one. It wasn't particularly exciting, but it was called Yo. It was an app where you literally sent a message to someone else that said
Oh
Yo.
yes, Yo. I remember Yo. And I remember the scrambles when they had not used passwords anywhere. And like I had to like do editing in our API server to like invalidate everyone's blank password because I think like Elon Musk got doxxed from it or something. It was such a calamity. It was, oh man, you're bringing me back. Um, yeah, so I mean, extensions aren't apps, or I like to say that they're apps for your cloud, not for your users. They're like, click, I have functionality fully installed in my backend. And two really good ones come to mind. One that we wrote copies data from Cloud Firestore into BigQuery. So Cloud Firestore is a really great horizontally scaled real-time database, but it's NoSQL, which isn't always ideal for like business intelligence style queries. Meanwhile, BigQuery isn't really designed for end user applications, but it's great at answering those business intelligence questions. So the extension to replicate the data across the two helped people solve each use case with the appropriate tool. The other one was actually end user driven. So when we announced the deprecation of Firebase Dynamic Links, a user basically came up with a fully functioning system, an open source tool that you could just install in your backend and get much of the same functionality without having to rely on the Firebase product. And this was our dream. we wanted to grow Firebase beyond the Firebase team, and extensions was a really good way of doing that.
Have there been parts of the project that you've been working on where you felt like you were totally surprised, or like, whoa, actually, how did we do that? Or wow, we really did that. That's way beyond what we were expecting.
I've got to say it's Firebase app hosting. We just released this at Google I/O this last year, but it was years in the making. And it was a massive undertaking, both technologically and politically, to organize so many teams to create one turnkey experience. I was both a tech lead and a manager at the time. And so I had to build it while also balancing the needs of our other portfolio products, like Cloud Functions for Firebase, the original Firebase hosting, Cloud Storage for Firebase. And yet we launched on schedule, although some features were dropped. And this was really important because there was no full stack web developer experience at Google before this. And it was a pretty obvious gap in Google's portfolio. And unlike the original Firebase hosting, this is on vanilla cloud terms of service, so it can be used by enterprise customers. And we're really just getting started. I literally have a document called Firebase App Hosting 5-Year Strategy. There's just so much more this product will do. But seeing the beginning where it's now in customers' hands has just been a dream come true.
It sounds amazing. So like let's move a little bit from, some of the projects to more leadership and management. Seems like it's been a great big part of your journey to go from tech lead to manager. And I
Mhm.
think from what I've seen and personally, managing people can be quite a different experience. So I'd love to know a little bit about, what your experience has been like there. What have you learned?
Yeah, what was really different was the number of people in my influence. So directly, I managed 11 people. I had 5 indirect reports, and we had countless numbers of partners. I really had to learn to document my thoughts better. I learned how to delegate more, to grow leaders who could take on some of the burden as the org grew. A tech lead grows new products. A manager grows new people who grows new products. And I was both the manager and tech lead. And as my org grew, I had to just get comfortable giving up some more of that technical leadership. I just eventually I didn't even have time to focus on the technical roadmap. So which is why, like, even though I had a lot of success as a manager, I recently decided I had to choose either between leading technically or people managing. Because I'm a perfectionist, and doing both required way too much overtime. And I worried it would endanger my relationship with my now wife, which obviously, that's priority one. Um, so after speaking with my manager, we agreed that my tech skills would be harder of the two to replace. So we expanded my technical scope, but handed off management to a new person. Julie comes from the Chrome team, so I'm really excited to see how her expertise in web technologies like helps benefit our portfolio.
I love that you mentioned that, you're worried about the level of perfectionism and how it could impact your wife. Um,
Mhm.
I've been married 16 years, and there are so many things that could get in the way that you have to actively choose to not let get there. So you're
Mhm.
recently married. Congrats. That's incredible. It's amazing. What's it been like? You've had to shift some priorities. Maybe you're thinking about life a little differently. Love to know more about that, and then also sort of balancing things in the career of tech.
Yeah. You know, wedding prep is hard. We did a lot of work prepping for the wedding, enough that I actually took 6 months off of teaching scuba. It really reiterated that lesson. I just can't do it all. Um, it was really stressful. I was doing a lot of overtime to get Firebase app posting out the door. So once it launched, I had that heart to heart with my manager, and I think my new role as Uber tech lead for Firebase's serverless portfolio is really going to give me the freedom to chase after my priorities I couldn't fund before as a manager. And this means I'm going to be in a better mood when I'm home with my wife. It also means I don't have the same sort of like quarterly crunches for performance reviews and check-ins, which gives me a more consistent work-life balance. And so my focus is finding meaning in my work, but no longer defining myself by it.
That's beautiful. Have you found that your approach here to leadership has changed? I don't mean for how you approach your own work, your own output, but how about your team and how you lead them?
Yeah, I mean, as I just mentioned, I'm shifting back from people management to purely technical management, which, as you grow in your career, there is a lot of overlap. I still coach people. I obviously have to get buy-in from people and get them aligned. For anyone who hasn't read it yet, I highly recommend they read our mutual friend and former colleague Charity Major's essay on what she calls the engineer manager pendulum. Good technical skills and people skills help both individual contributors and manager roles. Individual contributors need soft skills to collaborate and align with partners, and managers benefit from technical skills so they can be good coaches to their teammate. So getting married was a component of what made me pivot, but the whole journey of forming a team by combining others, getting them aligned, bringing them up to speed on the roadmap, I had worked out previously as an IC, and then frankly letting them just blow past me with their own planning was a huge point of growth for me. I now delegate a lot more because it's both better for my sanity and their growth. But I keep a literal document of my priorities in order. I also have a Kanban on my whiteboard with things like overdue, due today, tomorrow, next 7 days, next few weeks, in progress, blocked, delegated, and just to feel good, completed. It's important to decide when you're doing these things what you've completely handed off but need to check in on, what you're advising on, what you're collaborating on, and what you're driving.
Yeah, and just to go back to Charity for a minute, Charity Majors is the CTO of a company called Honeycomb, and she and along with another one of our former coworkers, Christine Yen, lead that company. It's a super cool product. So, Thomas, you mentioned earlier that you took some time off from scuba diving, excuse me, scuba instructing. I guess you're also diving, of course, which is cool. And you're a scuba instructor. You can tell us a little bit more about your expertise and level there, but what kind of got you into scuba diving in the first place? And do you use it as a release to kind of get away from tech, or how do you feel and think about it?
Yeah, there's a long path to how I got into it, but what I really value about it now, it's what I call active meditation. Even your breath affects your depth. So you have to be completely immersed in the moment, which really is good for disconnecting from all that stress that's above the water. Um, and I find that teaching is kind of like a microcosm of management. You see people grow from like being these timid but eager candidates to certified in 2 weeks. You transition from the challenge or frustration of teaching a new skill to the joy of basking in their achievement at a really rapid pace. And it reminds you that there's joy when people achieve their goals, which helps me stay positive when work might be in a rough patch. Also, in scuba, people's lives are literally in my hands, and it's a very different kind of stress, especially when teaching children. So it helped me remember that no one is gonna die if I slip on my commitments, which really helps me put things into perspective. But in my now defunct blog, I talk about some of the leadership skills that do translate. So some examples is that I learned the trick that rather than correcting a student when they make a mistake setting up their gear, I actually critique their buddy for not catching it and helping them. So this is important in scuba because I won't always be there and they need good buddy etiquette to help keep each other safe. But in my professional life, coaching the coach means that fewer people block on me and my scope of influence can grow. Another lesson I learned is that it's much more effective to point out what people should do rather than telling them what they're doing wrong. There's 1,000 things you can do wrong. And if you just say this is wrong, you're not helping guide people to success.
I remember about 6 months ago, I was scuba diving. I think I mentioned this to you, but I was scuba diving in Hawaii, and the path that we decided to take this day was to go through like 6 or 7 caves. I had never been through a cave before. I was completely freaked out the entire time. And I remember at one point, I felt like the shark that came out of the cave was like, it had to have been 30 feet long. And immediately I took the deepest breath and I hit the roof of the cave and I freaked out. And my dive instructor was like, hey, just chill. He helped me get my breath back, helped me kind of navigate it. But I love your idea or your comment there about staying in the moment, the breath work that's involved, because those things, if you can stay focused on where you are rather than where you could be, it really brings you back and kind of keeps you grounded. Um,
Yeah. I say also, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but I've picked up scuba photography, and so that's another level of focus. You're in the moment, you're staying in the detail, you're staying in your zen, but you also have to somehow scan the world and find that little tiny creature that would make a good photograph.
Oh, wow. I think there's too much going on there for me. Um, so, you've worked with some incredible companies. You've gotten married, which is incredible. You're a staff instructor on scuba. Um, when you look back at things professionally, personally, what have been some of the biggest, toughest, scariest challenges that you've faced?
Well, we'll keep it technical for now. So I think
Okay.
some of my craziest bugs were at Microsoft. So I actually did some innovation in the zip file format, and for legal reasons, I had to build it on my own, not talking to anyone else, with only a redacted copy of the RFC on how to unzip a file. And one of the memorable bugs only happened on AMD processors and not Intel processors. And it was because of an edge case on how they handled a particular assembly instruction. That was just the weirdest bug. Another monster was when I was helping diagnose an assertion failure in Internet Explorer. Uh, IE predates a lot of coding best practices. So this was like thousands of recursive calls deep in a function that was thousands of lines long with go-tos in both directions. Luckily, we had what we called a time traveling debugger, which was absolutely critical to find the bug. But nowadays, my problems are much more organizational. When we first launched Cloud Functions for Firebase, I think we had like 8 launch partners. We had to huddle weekly to make sure we got status requests or status updates on every single partner, figure out who was having difficulties, figure out how to unblock them, and we managed to launch on time with everyone there. And with Firebase app hosting, it was really unique because so much of Google is designed for RPCs, not for web hosting. And so we had to come to a lot of people and ask them for things that they're just not used to doing and to prioritize a product that hadn't even been built yet. But luckily, we were able to convince everyone of our vision. People were either able to give us what we wanted at launch time or they're actively building it. So I have a lot of faith in our success.
You mentioned earlier that you're transitioning to this thing called an Uber tech lead. Um, First, I'd love to know a little bit more, what that title means. And then second, what are some of the upcoming projects that you've got going on in your life, professionally, personally?
Yeah, so an Uber tech lead is basically a mid-level manager of tech leads. So a tech lead of tech leads. So there's people who figure out some of the day-to-day problems. I worry about things like long-term roadmaps, some of the more thorny problems, things that affect an entire product portfolio, making sure that stuff works better together. And so it really like it's brand new for me. It's just started this month, so I'm still learning a lot. I need to learn what influence means now. Now that like I'm not a manager, I can't actually assign the resource to work on what I think needs to be worked on. And it also means that as my portfolio grew, it's like I'm at a new company. I have a lot more to learn. I need to learn more about GenKit. I need to learn more about extensions, and figure out how I can make all of our products work better together. So my current focus is still on app hosting. I want it to be the best place where you can host Angular and Next.js apps. Where possible, I want to build open source tooling. I really believe in the open web and trying to, we can compete on the merits of our product. We don't need to lock you in. You should be able to host Firebase on Next.js or Angular wherever you want. Though on the other hand, we do have this really cool novel infrastructure, and we shouldn't shy away from leveraging it for really cool benefits either. On a personal level, my next big project is designing the welcome cards for the wedding. Uh, and then after that, my wife and I have talked about how we just suddenly have this big gap in all of our, the time that we had previously put to wedding planning. And we want to be intentional with how we fill it rather than just like collapsing exhausted from work and watching Netflix. One of the more responsible things I could do would be to learn Farsi so I can speak to my in-laws when they switch over. But we'll see.
That's great. I actually have a home automation built to prevent me and my wife from doing too much of this, exhausted from work and watching Netflix forever. At 9 every
Mhm.
night, my TV automatically turns off. Alexa says it's time to go to bed, and boom, we're out of there. I think it, thinking about it as a newlywed, but also as somebody who's been married for a while, just having time that you actually talk with your wife and do things with them, that sounds beautiful. So congrats on thinking about it that way.
Mhm.
Okay, so we've got current Tom, who I'm not saying is old by any means, but let's look backwards at the younger Tom. If you could look back and actually just reach out and talk with him, what would you tell him? What would be some of your advice?
So this is advice I actually got in college, so I'm kind of cheating, but it's just never stop learning. The industry moves so fast, and everything you know or do can be out of date faster than you realize it. This was a major motivator for me to join Parse, which has been one of the best moves of my career. And now I'm studying AI ML. I'm trying to do both like the high level stuff, learning how to use these agents, prompt engineering, that sort of thing, but also understand the underpinnings of it, the linear algebra perspective.
Amazing. So let's do this. I want to look a little bit further down the line and talk about the
Mhm,
future. I'd love to know what you think the future holds. Maybe we could talk a little bit about AI since it's sort of right now at the forefront. It's on everyone's tongues.
mhm. I mean, one of the things that like drives me nuts, AI is not new. Generative AI is new.
Yes.
But when we approach generative AI, I think of it in a few lenses. So in Google's case, we offer a direct AI product. We sprinkle it into our SaaS products like Google Workspaces. Uh, Within Firebase, in some cases, our customers use AI, and we need to give them the best tools to leverage it in their own applications. Or we can use AI to accelerate our customers' development. So if you think of like GitHub Copilot, or Firebase has a new Gemini plugin that will help you design and code your app. And then finally, I think AI is going to help operate businesses. So for us backend engineers, maybe AI can help identify and correlate anomalies to address or even maybe mitigate outages. I look forward to the day when AI can read my architecture document and tell me that I have a dumb idea. And then as we have a new manager on my team, they've been using AI to summarize 3 years of architecture diagrams and brainstorming sessions to kind of bootstrap onto our product. And in your world, which is very different from mine, I'm sure AI has really changed the way that you do things like sales and marketing. Like tools like Salesforce have helped coordinate sales and customer management for decades, but I assume they and competitors are really upping their game with the ability of AI to give you a bird's eye view, to tell you where you need to put focus, and potentially even using agents or other automation to expand your reach with fewer headcount.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I talked pretty recently with the CEO of a company called Gainsight, and they do customer success software. And he mentions that he loves the idea of a customer success manager sitting next
Mhm,
to, sort of sitting next to an AI agent who helps keep track and be more aware of all the accounts that they're working with, see some data that changes, something that's indicative of maybe a churn or a contraction, and just helping all these people do more, be more effective without feeling as much stress about what are we missing.
mhm.
Um,
Absolutely.
so in the future, there's all these. You mentioned AI, but obviously there's going to be some emerging trends, technologies that maybe we can start to see now that you might be already excited about. Anything that you're starting to see, feel, or look towards that you think will shape the industry in the next few years?
I'm not sure if this is a Debbie Downer or hopeful response, but I do think that AI or generative AI may be approaching Gartner's plateau of unrealistic expectations. I'm personally bearish on the idea of artificial general intelligence. I think that like so many advancements have come from a single white paper. All you need is attention. And there isn't that next white paper yet that will lead to AGI. But frankly, like the genie's out of the bottle. We are going to have a world that will never be the same. I think a lot of times we hear about like, well, will AI take people's jobs? But there's been so many other technological advancements in the past, from the printing press to agricultural improvements, that obsoleted old jobs, and yet society found new ways to employ those people and expand into a more rich and culturally diverse society. And so I do wonder sometimes, maybe this is a little off topic, but like, what will the post AI society be like? Is it really doom, gloom, and mass unemployment? Or will this just be an explosion of new careers that today we can't even imagine? I hope we get more than just prompt engineering as a new profession.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. I currently feel like I'm a prompt engineer writing better, doing more. But I think there's a movie called The Incredibles where there's a little boy who looks at the main character as he's dressed up. And I think the little boy says something like, or the Mr. Incredible, he basically says, like, what were you expecting? And he says, something incredible. And sometimes I feel that way about
Yeah,
AI. Like I'm
yeah.
hopeful that we'll see more. And also I'm kind of like you. I don't think that the future is going to be really doom and gloom. I just see that more people will be able to do more faster. I prefer to see as opposed to replacement. It's more of a supplement. You become like Iron Man. You're a human within a mega suit.
Mhm. I There's a great saying I saw online. AI is not going to take your job. Someone using AI is.
I think that's the other big part of AI that's actually pretty problematic. And this goes back to one of the things you said earlier, which is, never stop learning. There's a lot of people who are unwilling to try new tools, do new things.
Mhm.
And AI is just one of those things. You just have to try it. You have to see how it works. You have to understand it. You do have to become a bit of a prompt engineer. And as you do that,
Mhm.
obviously you can develop a skill. But like you said, if you don't, you can and will be potentially replaced by those types of people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a force multiplier that you have to adapt or you're going to be left behind.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So you've built all these systems with, you mentioned earlier, petabytes of data, which, looking at, how much my computer holds, 250 gigabytes of data, petabyte is gigantic. Um, and now the world's talking about AI, you're talking about cloud infrastructure, edge computing, all these really amazing things. What is the next big thing that you're excited about beyond AI, for example?
Uh, so I prepped for more of like a nuance in each of these sections. Uh, Edge computing has been something that's close to my heart as I've been focused on app hosting. A lot of companies told you that the edge was the future. And we internally had a hard time because it's unprofessional to publicly argue with a competitor's statements, even though we thought that the promise was overstated. People eventually realized what we knew, which is that edge compute without edge data is a really bad idea. And frankly, edge data is either partitioned across the edge or it's eventually consistent. And people just aren't used to thinking about that yet. So, yeah.
Let me just ask you one quick clarifying question. For those who may not know or understand edge computing, talk a little bit more about what that means.
So, this is so depending on what level you want me to go to,
Just kind of a
edge
super high
computing was
level.
typically so CDNs, content delivery networks. Most of the time, your website doesn't actually reach the central server. We generate a page. It's the login page. It's the IKEA page for some stool, whatever. It's been generated once, and it's stored on the edge and served. And that, you might have one location in the world, in Iowa, for example, that you generate new content. But then you have hundreds of machines out there that store, what Scott visited for when I visit. And it remembers and it stores. But we've started evolving with what we call edge computing, where that machine is no longer just dumb and what we call cache. It can actually be programmed. And I think there's a lot of really cool innovations there. Some of the areas of my focus are looking at how that caching can be augmented for experimentation or whatever. There's a lot of things that would break the cache that I think a smarter cache can handle. And then some people have put authorization and other things inside that CDN. That way you can maybe fail a response more quickly or without having to go to the more expensive computing layers. But for a while, everyone's saying there's going to never be any more central computer. We're going to always program at the edge. And it's like, well, you had one computer before, and now you have 120 computers that are all talking and they can't wait on each other because then it's not fast anymore. And that programming model is just so fundamentally different. And there's two things that are going to happen here. One, people are going to realize when they got overzealous and it wasn't actually the right solution. And I think here you're going to see a couple of different layers of going from the very edge to the very middle with some steps in between. So, for example, with Firebase hosting the original product, we kind of have three layers. There's the CDN layer where you can cache content maybe in Iowa, but we also have a middle layer where if someone goes to Europe to download a page, the image is in Europe already, even if it's not in the CDN. And then finally, if they need dynamic content, it goes back to Iowa. And so I think we're going to see topologies emerge where you can program with different levels of complexity because it is very complex to program at the edge to benefit with the right amount of benefit for the right amount of cost. And then separately, where the edge really is appropriate, I think that we're going to see people learning new types of technologies like dealing with eventually consistent data or designing their data patterns so it can be totally partitioned so that you don't need your Mumbai customers' data in the London CDN. Here I've been monitoring a couple of things. There's a movement called cloud native, where people are really rallying behind taking independent projects and consolidating them into new standards. And then those various companies can conform to the standard. And this has really defragmented the industry so that you have the flexibility to program to a standard and try different vendors. And it's really given flexibility and agility to people. The next is that I think I'm starting to see a pendulum swing away from microservices back part way towards monoliths. Not the true big, 10 gigabyte monolith of yesteryear, but sometimes people got so overly zealous with microservices that I call them nanoservices. They're building sandcastles instead of Lego bricks. And I really do think that some of the new primitives are going to help you find a balance between these two extremes. So this is one of the reasons why I'm really excited about some of our products like Cloud Run. So because you can run any container with EventArc, you can have any number of triggers. What used to be 20 functions can be one service. So you still get all those serverless benefits, high-level programming with auto scaling, scale to zero pricing, but through consolidation, you can mitigate some of the downsides like cold starts. And I'd be a little remiss if I didn't toot our own horn. Firebase app hosting is built on Cloud Run, which, because it's container-based, feels a little bit like infrastructure as a service, not platform as a service. And so you get to have concurrent executions and you pay for container seconds, not request seconds. So this is a bit more of a lower level concept. But in exchange, we've seen from multiple customers that this leads to significant cost savings. I've done some back of the napkin math, and I've seen that Firebase app hosting can easily be up to 10 times cheaper than some of the competitors at high volume workloads, thanks to this one competitive advantage. And then finally, you mentioned AI. Here, I think we're just scratching the surface. Right now, because of that, all you need is attention white paper. Everyone is creating chatbots and image generators, but we're starting to mature. RAG is helping reduce hallucinations. Image generation is getting significantly better with the ability to refine on previous queries. We're seeing video generation and recognition as some of the cutting edge innovation. And then I've noticed that gathering and summarizing information is providing just as much or even more utility than just merely splitting or spitting out fluff with an agent. So I see in our portfolio services like GenKit really being a parallel to what we did together at Parse. By abstracting infrastructure over multiple providers, you can develop more quickly and with much more agility because you can swap out components rather than coding directly against the primitives. So we hope that our open source work on pipelines, pluggable extensions, tunable parameters, a local developer story with tracing is going to really help hold the hands of developers as they pioneer the evolution of this industry.
I certainly am using AI to generate and create lots of images and very simple questions so far, but I'm also excited to see it mature. One of the things that
Yeah.
you said that I thought was really cool was, talking about building with sandcastles, not with Lego bricks. I think my whole floor in my home is just covered with Lego bricks, but they work and they help you build things the right way. And sandcastles, they disappear. There's places in the Outer Banks in North Carolina where the homes that were built on the sand, the homes now tower 20 to 30 feet over the sand and the water because the sand has just sort of gone away. It's not built for time, and it's not built for the scale that you need. So I think that's a really appropriate example there. It's been awesome having you. It's been a pleasure to have you on our podcast, and just wanted to say thanks for joining us today.
It was great to speak to you again.